Fellas, there's a wide range of MMA fans out there, from guys who don't watch the UFC to guys who binge watch the most dead early prelim in an Apex card ever. So we're going to be going through every stage of being an MMA fan, from stage 1 to the final stage. And we'll start off with stage 1, which is what's MMA. The people out there who have never heard of MMA. I don't know if you've seen those videos on YouTube, those UFC fighter versus pacifist videos, but it's these type of people. A lot of it is just old people who's never heard of the UFC. It has to be old people who are they're past the time of the UFC, they've never heard of it, or people from indigenous tribes who have never seen what MMA or the UFC is. Because if you're on social media and you've never seen like a highlight of the UFC, like a clip or a YouTube short of some sort of highlight of the UFC, and you're blissfully unaware of what it is, I don't know how you've never seen it before. These people likely don't watch any sports, because even if you watch like, you know, fuck any sort of contact sport, you've heard of the UFC. They don't doom scroll or check social media. They're likely elder. Their favorite MMA fighter is probably Bruce Lee. So these are the people who don't really know what MMA is. The closest thing they know to martial arts, like I said, it's probably Bruce Lee. They might have heard of Muhammad Ali, but the small percentage of the population who don't know what MMA is, 90% of them are probably elderly. That's the first stage. And then we've got aware of MMA. These people know McGregor. They're potentially boxing casuals. Their favorite MMA fight is probably Conor McGregor, because that's the only person they know. They're not even aware of like Topuria or Makhachev or Sean O'Malley or any other big star in the UFC apart from McGregor. They think the UFC and MMA is the same thing. They think Dana White and Joe Rogan are the same people. And they're potentially boxing casuals as well. Not even hardcore boxing fans, because even if you're a hardcore boxing fan, you're more of an MMA fan than these guys, because UFC and boxing, they go hand to hand. They're the two most similar combat sports out there. So, well, two most close combat sports out there. So even if you're a hardcore boxing fan, you're more of an MMA fan than these guys. These are like the blokes in the middle of a pub who, you know, probably tune into the massive boxing fights that go down. They know who Conor McGregor is, but again, they don't really pay attention to the world of combat sports. They know McGregor. They're potentially boxing casuals. They're aware of MMA. They don't watch the sport. Again, likely elderly people, the type of people you'd see in a bar. And then we've got stage 3, the casual fan or the new MMA fan. These are the guys who know megastars, but they don't follow the sport. So they'll know McGregor. They'll also know the likes of Topuria and John Jones and Islam Makhachev and some of the megastars of the sport. And these are highlight reel demons. They get their MMA news from like TikTok or YouTube shorts. Everything MMA related they find on social media while doom scrolling. This is where they get their source of information from MMA. They'll often say things like, these Dagestan huggers are taking over the sport. When's McGregor fighting? They'll call any guy with a beard or anybody from Russia a Khabib clone, even if they look nothing like him or fight nothing like him. And their favorite MMA fight is probably something like Topuria or Makhachev, just one of the 5 fighters that they're actually aware of. So this is the new kind of casual fan of MMA. They know the megastars. They don't follow the sport. You know, you ask them anybody outside of the top, anyone who's not a megastar or a champion, they don't know who they are. And then we've got stage 4, the advanced casual. These are aware of most of the big names in the sport, but they're still probably capped on general knowledge. So they'll know the likes of Pantoja. They'll know the likes of Kevin Holland and Shavkat Rakhmonov, Arman Sarukian, Khalil Roundtree. Fighters who have at least some sort of name value in the UFC, they'll be aware of them. They'll also pay attention to like fight announcements while they're scrolling. So if there's been a big fight in the UFC announced, they're going to be aware of it. If there's a super fight announced, they're going to be aware of it. They're probably going to know who they are. And they'll probably pay attention to news as well, like Topuria breaking up with his wife or John Jones ducking Tom Aspinall. They're still not going to watch a UFC live event. You know, you won't catch them watching a live UFC event. You know, they'll often say things like, I don't have time to watch the UFC. And their favorite fight is probably like a Holloway or a Chimaev, just any big star that's easily justifiable to be a favorite fighter. So the advanced casual, they know all the big names in the sport. They kind of like to keep up with the sport and all the big news, but anything below the tip of the iceberg, they're not really aware of when it comes to MMA. And then we've got stage 5, the average MMA fan. People who tune into the big main events, they keep up to date with the sports. So the likes of Topuria versus Oliveira, they're going to be there. DDP and Chimaev, Ankalaev and Poatan, they're going to be there. They're probably not going to tune into the likes of Bilal Muhammad and JDM or these kind of lesser profile main events that we have in the UFC. Like, if they are going to watch a pay-per-view as well, they're likely only going to pay attention to, like, the main event or the main 2 fights. And these guys are TikTok demons. These are the type of fans you're going to see in TikTok comment sections, coming up with some of the most outrageous takes that you can find in MMA, commenting on TikTok, liking the most delusional TikTok comments out there. Their favourite fight is probably Poatan, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, if we're talking about the average MMA fan, Poatan's an easy guy to have as your favourite fan, and it's obviously respectable. So, stage 5, average MMA fan. They'll tune into the big main events. They're a bit of I guess they are kind of an advanced casual. They keep up to date with the sport. They watch the sport, and they'll be on TikTok, and that's kind of where they find their news of MMA, and they'll tune into the main events or the big main events. And then stage 6, the pay-per-view watcher. These guys watch most pay-per-view main cards, but they'll kind of still skip fight nights and prelims, so they kind of like to watch the sport for the name. So you'll see them tuning into the main card of a pay-per-view. That's kind of where they watch the UFC. They don't really pay attention to the prelims. They'll kind of wake up and set an alarm for the main card of a pay-per-view. They'll get excited for the likes of O'Malley or Topuria. It's kind of the name value that drags these type of guys in. They're not going to be caught dead near an Apex card. They probably don't even know what the Apex is. They ain't going anywhere near that sort of shit. And their favourite MMA fight is probably, again, someone who's on a pay-per-view main card frequently, like an Alex Pereira or an Alejandro Pantoja or a DDP, like an active fighter who you can see on a pay-per-view a lot, guys who they're used to watching. These are the type of fans that these guys will start to watch. So, pay-per-view watcher, they'll tune into most pay-per-view main cards, skip the fight nights, skip the prelims. And then stage 7, the baby hardcore. These guys watch mostly every pay-per-view. They'll dabble in the prelims and the fight nights as well. And this is, I feel like, the turning point from turning from a casual fan to a hardcore fan. So nearly every single pay-per-view, these guys will tune into at least pay-per-view main cards. They'll tune into every pay-per-view they can. And they may even tune into the prelims as well. If they've got the time, if they're there, they might tune into the prelims. I feel like a perfect guy to kind of represent this type of fan is Theo Von. Because every now and then you'll see Theo Von at a random pay-per-view at the first early prelim. And he'll just be chilling, watching the card in his free time. And I feel like this guy perfectly represents this type of fan. And their favorite MMA fight is probably something like Fluffy Hernandez. Not a mega star, not even a star, just a well-known name in the MMA world that's kind of a cool fighter to have as your favorite fighter, like a Fluffy Hernandez will probably be their favorite fighter. So a baby hardcore. They watch mostly every pay-per-view. They'll dabble in the prelims. They'll dabble in the relevant fight nights. I think most MMA fighters are probably like a baby hardcore. Most MMA fighters that keep up to date with the sport. I'd say that's probably stage 7. Stage 8, hardcore-esque. Guys who watch most fight nights and pay-per-views, but they'll probably skip the occasional week card. So on the average run, they'll just watch every UFC card. If they've got nothing going on, they're going to tune into the UFC, whether it's a pay-per-view or an Apex main card. They might skip the odd, event here and there. If it's like a really dead event, they'll skip it. They're not obligated to watch every single UFC event. They're not going to be tuning into the Contender Series. They're not going to be caring about the Ultimate Fighter as well. And I feel like these guys are actually the best type of MMA fan because they know what they're talking about. They watch the sport. They know what they're talking about. They keep up to date with the sport, but they're not overly nerdy about it. They're not overly obsessed with the sport. They're not trying to overly prove that they're an MMA fan and be obsessed with the sport. I feel like these are the best type of fans you can have in MMA. And their favorite fighter probably ranges from Poeton to like Nate Landwehr, just some fucking cool prelim fighter on the roster. Their favorite MMA fighter probably ranges, but they're not overly trying to be like some nerdy MMA fan. So the Hardcoreesque watch most UFC cards. They do tune into most cards. Every now and then they'll take a card off because they ain't obligated to watch every event. And sometimes there is just a shit UFC event, and no matter how hardcore a fan you are, you don't have to watch every event. And I feel like most MMA content creators kind of fall into this category. Most good content creators, they'll watch most event. They aren't going to tune into everything though. And then we've got stage 9, guys who watch every single card without fail. UFC completed it, mate. The mega pay-per-views, they're going to stay there from the first early prelim to the main event. Same for the weaker pay-per-views. Same for the average fight night cards. Same for the Apex cards. They're going to be there all the time from 12 p.m. at night to 3 a.m. in the morning to 8 a.m. in the morning. No matter what time it is, they're going to adjust their sleep schedule to revolve around the UFC. Every Saturday, their only plan is the UFC. If the UFC's on and they're lost when there isn't any UFC event, you could cook up the worst card imaginable, stick it in the Apex, and you already know these guys are going to be watching it from the first prelim of that card to the main event. They're going to watch every single UFC event without fail, and their favorite MMA fight is probably something like Marco Tulio. Their favorite fight is probably some prelim fighter, not really a big name fighter, so he kind of looks better. It kind of makes them look like they know the sport because their favorite MMA fighter is somebody that not many people know of. So the MMA nerd, they watch every single card without fail. They're aware of nearly every single fighter on the roster, and like I said, you could cook up the worst card. They're going to be there front row watching the event. And then we've got stage 10, the MMA loser. Similar to stage 9, they'll watch everything, including every UFC card, the Ultimate Fighter, and the Contender Series. So they're going to be there watching every big pay-per-view. They're going to be there watching every big fight night. They're going to be there at every single UFC card, no matter what. Like I just said, similar to stage 9, they're also going to tune into the Contender Series. They're going to make sure every Tuesday evening they don't miss any fight on the Contender Series. Now, don't get me wrong, the Contender Series serves up bangers, but these guys are going to be there from the first week to the last week of the Contender Series on a yearly basis, watching every prospect come up from the regional scene. They'll also watch the Ultimate Fighter. They'll get intrigued every year about the fights that take place on the Ultimate Fighter. They'll keep note of the storylines on the Ultimate Fighter, and these are the type of guys to accuse you of being a casual if you don't watch the Contender Series. But you don't watch the Contender Series, you're a casual, you ain't a hardcore fan. And their favorite MMA fighter is probably some random fighter from the Ultimate Fighter or the Contender Series that they've managed to, keep an eye on, and now that's their favorite fighter because they haven't got, they've got big name value. So the MMA loser, they're going to watch everything UFC related, even the Contender Series, even the Ultimate Fighter. They're everything you want in a UFC fan, the MMA loser. And then we've got stage 11, the MMA is live. This is stage 10, but they also find ways to watch other promotions too. These are truly the biggest MMA fans you can find on the planet, but it's got to the point where it's kind of concerning how much they consume the sport of MMA. So they're going to watch the UFC, they're going to watch the Contender Series, they're going to watch the Ultimate Fighter, and when I say they watch regional shows, I'm not talking about like Nurmagomedov versus Hughes 2 in PFL. I'm talking about some random PFL main event. I'm talking about some random 1FC main event. I'm talking about some random LFA main event. If there's like an iceberg of UFC events, at the tip of the iceberg, you've got the mega fights that everybody tunes into, and then you've kind of got the title fights that might not have that much star power, but they're still big fights. And then you'll have, you know, the average fight night main event in a crowded arena, and then you'll have like an Apex main event that very few UFC fans tune into, and then you'll have like the early prelim for an Apex main event, for an Apex card, which, you know, you start to get the hardcore fans, and then you've got the Contender Series, and then you've got like some random regional promotion over like LFA that these fans will tune into. So they'll be there watching the massive fights in MMA, they'll be there watching the mega fights, and they'll also be watching the fights where there's about 300 men in the arena, if that. It's some random fucking bar with two random guys fighting for a regional belt. They'll be watching the bigger stars. They'll be watching guys who have probably got like a 3-0 record fighting for a belt on the regional scene. They'll be watching everything. And their favourite MMA fighter is probably some champion from the regional scene who they're convinced is going to be the next big thing in MMA. These guys probably also tune into Power Slap and UFC, BJJ as well. Everything MMA related that you could possibly watch. These guys are watching. That's stage 11. MMA's life. Their life revolves around MMA. And they pretty much don't really have a life because their entire weekly schedule is based off watching the UFC, MMA, Power Slap, BJJ, everything. They'll be watching it. But those are the different stages of being an MMA fan. Let me know what you think. If I've missed out any stages, what your thoughts are. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you.